This is Creativity Drill with Dr. Dawn and Jonathan Rundman.
Hey, this is Dawn Rundman. You're listening to Creativity Drill. My husband Jonathan and I invite creatives to our podcast so we can have conversations about the creative process and sources of inspiration and what it takes to make the big leap of calling yourself an artist. On this show, you'll listen into our conversation with Andrew DeYoung. Andrew is a writer, editor, blogger, podcast host, and keen observer of pop culture. Andrew and I work together by day at Spark House. It was such a treat to invite him to our kitchen table by night to talk about all things creative.
Andrew, hello.
Is it working?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay.
And you can even get a little closer.
Get a little closer? Okay.
Come a little closer.
How's that?
That sounds wonderful. Great. Dawn, why don't you say something in your mic and let's see.
All right. Check.
Yeah, we're
Making sure
working. The levels are on.
Okay.
And we've been in recording mode here and had lots of guests lately. So it feels like we have momentum.
Yeah.
That's nice. How many guests have you had?
Oh gosh, I'm forgetting now.
4.
Yeah, I think we've had 4.
So
before.
I'm number 5.
4 is a lot more than 0.
It is.
So
it is.
It's the,
How does it feel
It's good.
to have a podcast? Yeah? Is it fun so far?
It's poddy.
Yeah.
Svea just called it that pod thing.
That pod thing.
That's how she described it.
So kids aren't listening to podcasts then?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Although we taped one yesterday. And
oh, did you?
This morning, and I was getting the kids ready for school, my daughter mentioned that she overheard some of the conversation, and then she repeated back what we were talking about.
Oh, really?
And if I remember correctly, it was quite long into the conversation, which means she was awake in bed at like 10:30, paying attention through the wall what we were talking about. So
I'll try to keep it down, or
Yeah.
not too
Keep it
interesting for
G.
her.
Keep it G.
Keep it G. I can do that.
No swears.
But it means that even as we do this in real time, we're already going to have our first listener, an 8-year-old, about 12 feet away from us right now.
Great. Well, it's good to have an audience.
Yeah, it is.
It'll make us be more on our toes.
That's right.
Because you perform better when,
Well, and you got to be appropriate for all audiences. We may have 8-year-olds listening to the podcast. So
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Are you a listener of this medium?
I am a listener of this medium, and I've listened to a few episodes of your podcast.
Awesome.
So I boned up on Creativity Drill before I came.
Great.
But yeah, I listened to a few during the work week generally.
Great.
So, yeah.
I figured you would be familiar with it because I don't know you at all. I'm just meeting you for like the third time here.
Yep. But
I got to check out your website and stuff, and it's very cool. And you're sort of a technological person.
Yes. So I'm not sure which website you got to go to, but so there's andrewdeyoung.com.
Yeah, that's the one I went to. And I checked out your links.
The links, yep.
Yeah.
And then there's a site that I blog at with a friend of mine called The Stake. And that's a pop culture site, and we do have a podcast at The Stake as well.
Are you a host?
I am a participant. My friend Chris moderates the podcast.
Do you have guests, or is it just the same people talking every time?
It's generally the same people, although we do have guests. Our current setup is that every week we will watch a movie of one person's choosing, and then discuss it for about an hour or a little over an hour.
So the film has already been watched.
The film has already been watched, and we let people know what film we're going to watch so that they can watch it along with us and listen to the podcast with having it viewed. But the next one we're going to watch, I remembered that a friend of mine was a big fan of the movie. 1995, Clueless. So we kind of do all genres and stuff like that. And I remembered that my friend Deb was a big fan of the movie, so I think we're going to have her on as a guest.
Oh, awesome! So the people who are listening to this podcast right now, we hope they'll be wanting to go check out yours. So what's that one called?
It's called The Stake Podcast. STAKE, as in
Not to be confused.
Not to be confused with the meat. It's more like what you kill vampires with, or thestake.org, which is our blog.
And is it searchable at all podcast directories like iTunes?
iTunes, Stitcher,
yep.
Yes.
Cool. We just Stitchered our podcast like a couple days ago.
You're set up.
Yeah, it seems like those are the magic.
It is.
Those are the directories of choice.
The magic too, I think.
Yeah, boy, we had a lot to learn because all I knew about podcasts was being a listener. But man, there is a lot of biology going on behind the scenes.
There absolutely is.
Infrastructure, yeah.
Infrastructure. And speaking of infrastructure and procedures,
yes,
maybe that's a good transition into just sort of a general
good segue
introduction into the man who is Andrew DeYoung.
Yeah, should I just give a quick summary of who I am and what I do?
That would be
sure.
That would be lovely. And then I'll give a quick summry of who you are and what you do.
It'd be nice to hear the outside perspective. But I'm a colleague of Dawn's at Spark House, where I am the director of operations, formerly a project manager as well as the manager of project management, and with some more broad responsibilities, still managing the project management team, but with some broader responsibilities having to do with just processes and procedures at Spark House.
Yeah. And really, you've had an ascent from intern,
to
director.
Yes.
So, like, there's not a lot of people who are at the same company that they interned with.
No.
However many years ago, I was trying to remember what year that would have been that you started as an intern.
I think that may have been 2007, maybe even, I think 2007 or 2006. I can't quite recall. But I started full time in 2008, January 2008. And worked for about 3 years, and then went away for 10 months, all of 10 months.
It was like a sabbatical.
It was a little sabbatical,
kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, being employed elsewhere.
An intermission, but then I came back to Spark House, and I've been there since 2011.
So that was your idea. When you were away, you started thinking to yourself, wow, I kind of wish I was back where I used to be?
Yeah, I had left it behind, and I did actually regret it. It's a special place, I think, Spark House, and just with great people.
Were you worried that you might not have a spot to go back to, or did they just make it happen when they knew you were?
Or can you not disclose
for
the
some
terms?
reason? No, I can't. I mean, there was nothing behind the scenes, but for some reason when I left, I knew that I wasn't, or I had the feeling that I wasn't done with that place. And other people have told me the same thing, that you're never quite done with Augsburg Fortress, you're never quite done with Spark House. So it was true for me.
Yeah, it's like a title of a short story, The Reacquisition of Andrew DeYoung.
That's a good idea. I may jot that one down.
Okay. For our listeners, Andrew did bring his book.
Yes, and Moleskine, and I confess that I don't quite know why, but for whatever reason, I felt like I'd be more comfortable with something to jot in.
Moleskine feels good, so
it does.
I can't argue with that.
Are you known for carrying that?
I am
book?
not, but I at work we all carry our own laptops, so I have a way of taking down something really quickly, and when I don't have the laptop with me, generally I'll take this around with me.
Dawn got me a Moleskine notebook like that. For those listening, it's those little mini books with the beautiful leather binding and the elastic wraparound and the really fine paper inside, and I love it.
Do you use it for music ideas?
Yeah, mine has staff paper inside.
Staff paper.
So I can notate chords and notes and the treble clef or whatever. It's
and is
really
that how
cool.
it starts for you, as music or as lyrics?
It happens both ways, although usually it starts with lyrics and then music. But what I've been using my Moleskine book for is, like, oftentimes I'll get to collaborate with another artist and I have to learn their tunes.
Sure.
And sometimes the tunes are really hard. Like, they have lots of changes and lots of chords. And so what I'll do is I'll make myself a little chart in the Moleskine notebook with a pencil so I can erase and adjust. And I'll put, I'll notate little riffs if I have to know a certain melodic movement, or I'll actually chart out the measures, because like some of these situations had crazy changes of time signatures and stuff. So I'd make myself like a little fake book chart in the staff paper of the Moleskine book, and it was better than, typing it into a computer. It just felt more like like a musical. It was more musical.
More tactile.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah. I love that. I love the physicality of paper and pen and pencil.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love Sharpies. But there's something about using something like a Moleskine book where the quality of the thing itself is so nice and pleasant.
I'm pretty sure that's their brand promise, right?
It is, and you've got the elastic clasp, and you've got the ribbons. So even the process of opening it feels very tactile. There's a bit of sense memory there with having an idea and kind of having to open it up.
Yeah,
so
that's nice. Well, and perhaps that's linked to sort of the other part of your identity. Lest people think that we're starting to like director of operations, which does require a lot of creativity.
Sure,
I'm not saying that, but in your civilian life, you have another role that you claim.
Yeah, I am a writer, both actual and aspiring. There's always aspirations, but I'm a writer, yes, and it's something that I've been learning to claim a little bit more and give myself permission to call myself a writer. So there's the blog, which I already talked about, but most days, generally 4 or 5 days a week, I spend an hour and a half writing fiction. Particularly, specifically novels.
And that's amazing. So I will pause and say that's
Thank
amazing.
you.
And congratulations to you for upholding the discipline of
Thank
doing
you.
that. That's really amazing.
Yes, I started doing it seriously in November of 2012. Prior to that, I had written a lot of short fiction, and I'd written one very bad novel in college that. One of those ones you just kind of have to get out of your system.
It's the first pancake.
Right, the first pancake. And I often refer to the novel that I wrote in 2012 as my first novel, even though I had that other one in college. Because it feels, in many ways, like my first novel. Because it was the beginning of kind of a new phase in my life where I was really... I was no longer thinking of myself as someone who wanted to write and wished that he could find time to write more, but a time when I was actually doing it, when I was actually writing, and that hasn't stopped. I've since written another one, and I'm at work on a third or a fourth, depending on how you count it. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So can you describe some of the... We've talked about this before,
Yeah.
but just sort of what your discipline of writing is, what that looks like, and what technologies do you use?
So it has shifted what my discipline is. In the beginning, I was kind of carving out time wherever I could, and very often that meant sitting down at the dining room table around 8 o'clock and writing until it was time to go to bed. But I found that I couldn't really sustain that. At the end of the day, I've just got so much. I kind of want to sit at the end of the day. There's kind of a lack of energy, a lack of mental energy at the end of the day. But what I've found as I've kept going and kept committing myself to it is that there's always this block of time early in the morning. I'm an early riser, and what tends to happen is that I will naturally wake up around between 5 and 5:30.
God bless you.
Yeah, just naturally. I mean, it's fine. I get enough sleep, so you don't have to worry about me.
That's an enviable
someone has to
melatonin.
Do it. Right?
Yeah.
So I wake up naturally between 5 and 5:30, and my wife most certainly does not. She tends to want to sleep in. So I can't turn on the light and read during that time. And so what I was basically doing was just lying there and waiting for the morning to come. So one day I decided that I would use that time to write, and it turned out to be the best possible practice that I could have started. Because for me anyway, there are some people who really burn the midnight oil, and that's when they are functioning their best. But for me, that morning energy is the best. I haven't expended a lot of mental energy making all of the decisions that a person needs to make in a given day yet. And I'm also kind of still sleepy, which helps on some level, because
it's like your conscious mind is...
It's half on.
It's half on.
It's half on, half off.
Yeah, so that's a
perfect.
great creative space.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. So that's what I've been doing, and I can manage that about I'm going to say 4.5 days a week on average. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 4, but it's worked well.
And are you at your laptop for this kind of writing?
I'm at my laptop. We've got a bedroom that we have turned into an office, and there's a desk, a two workstation desk. It's basically a big flat table, big flat narrow table, and one half of it is my wife's. She's a graphic designer, and one half of it is mine. And I've got my laptop there, and basically I type away and kind of watch out the window as the sky gets brighter, and then at some point the cat tells me that it's time for her to be fed, and then I'm done. So that's kind of my process. And then in terms of technology, I said I use the laptop, but if there is, and it sounds like I'm doing an endorsement, which kind of I am, but really in this sort of creative phase where I've found a lot more success, a big part of it actually has been a software called Scrivener. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's basically a fairly cheap, it's about $40, a fairly cheap word processing program that is written, or it was programmed rather, for creative writers. And it's just a really great environment to bring all of your thoughts, all of your sort of creative scrap, all of your scene notes or character notes together into one place, as well as outlines and stuff like that, and write both short works and much longer works. I also know people who use it for PhD dissertations, because it's really great at integrating research into a single file that you're also drafting in. So that has proved to be something for me. So Scrivener,
you're all
look
about
it
the
up.
efficiency.
I'm all about
Andrew.
the efficiency. So even within creativity, the system really does matter.
Yeah.
Or I found that it matters to me.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think because I think some people, when they find out you have sort of a more technical, analytical position, and then they find out, and I'm on my third and fourth novel, that probably surprises some people, like if they're just meeting you. But sometimes I think that's because people think like, well, you can either be a creative writer type, or you can be someone who's highly functional in an office environment, managing $1 million budgets and 2-year project schedules and things like that. So say a little bit about that.
Well, I think that it probably surprises people at work more than it does people just in my life who don't know sort of my work self.
Okay.
Because at work, I am very systematic and very. I'm a project manager, and so I'm very attuned to the sort of the behaviors that lead to the most success in those kind of positions. But I think that the people who I engage with, both acquaintances, peers, friends, on a more regular basis who don't know me from work, probably are less surprised by it, partly because many of them are people who have degrees in the humanities like I do. I'm an English major. I know a lot of art majors, a lot of philosophy majors, a lot of history majors, people who understand that there was this thing that they used to do in college. Maybe they still have an outlet, but it's fairly common for people who have studied in those fields to end up in corporate jobs where on the most obvious level, there's not a whole lot of relationship between that first thing and the thing that they're doing now. But when you dig under the surface, it makes sense on some level.
Yeah. Huh.
So
when you're getting ready to wake up early and start the novel writing process in the morning, like before that happens, do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with a plot twist and have to get out of bed and run to the laptop or to the Moleskine notebook?
You know what? I should get better about writing when inspiration strikes. But honestly, that doesn't happen to me a lot. Not that I don't find myself waking up and inspiration is striking, or I don't find myself in the middle of the day, a plot point will come to me. But generally, I find that my writing session works best if I'm kind of meditating on what should happen at the next writing session through the entire day, and I kind of take that with me into sleep. It sounds a little weird, but one of the worst and most disheartening things for any writer, and I think that it's one of the things that dissuades people who want to write from writing, is when they sit down and they don't have anything. Because there exists this idea out there that if you just sit down and kind of turn your mind off and let the words flow, that somehow what comes out of your fingertips will be brilliant. That's not been my experience. It may be some people's experience. In my experience, the best thing that you can do is finish a writing session and then immediately think about what needs to happen, what kind of problems you need to solve, or where you need to take a scene or a story next, and think about that through the entire day. On some level, you'll be turning it over, even if you're thinking about other things, and then at night, you'll probably be thinking about it on some level as well. So when a writing session goes poorly, it's probably because I have not been thinking about it adequately throughout the day.
Are you learning these techniques by experience in your own life, or are you doing research and reading about writing skills or talking to other authors?
Mostly by experience, although one of the kind of formative things that I learned as a writer, I learned from an author named Amor Towles. He wrote a book called The Rules of Civility, which was popular 2 or 3 years ago. Got on a lot of bestseller lists. And what he said, he was, I think, an investment banker before he became a writer. Very busy man, high-powered career, and he had 2 kids. But he had this dream of being a writer. And what he said was that he worked for many, many years on a failed novel. And ultimately he scrapped it and started over from scratch. And what he started over from scratch with ended up being The Rules of Civility, which was his first successful novel. And he said that the difference for him was that he first wrote an outline. He actually wrote an outline. He said, here are the things that I think should happen in this book. And then he only had a very small window of time once a week, I think it was on Saturday, where he could actually write, where he wasn't busy with work and he wasn't busy with kids. And what he would do throughout the week is just mull over in his head what needed to happen in the next chapter. So this was something that was, and I have way more time than he does. I'm not an investment banker. I do not have 2 kids. But this was something that was really revelatory for me, because most people just want more time to be creative. And he had come up with a way to be creative that worked for him with a very limited time frame. And it was as simple as writing down a list of things that he thought should happen in his story and thinking about it. And then making sure that every so often there was that block of time that was just for writing, and making sure that he optimized that time by setting himself up for success. And even as I'm saying this, I know that I sound a lot like a project manager, right? Optimizing your time. I mean, yeah. But
what are the deliverables?
I know, yeah.
So many artists that anybody would talk to and that we've been talking to on this show talk about the need for time, and how time is this super precious thing that is really hard to get in any sort of workable amount. And
it is.
And isn't that amazing? It's like the common thing, no matter what your medium is, there's never enough of it. But once in a while in your life, you have a window maybe where you get a lot of time, or maybe you get a grant that allows you to go somewhere and just maximize your time. And man, whenever that happens, to me, it just feels like the greatest thing. It's so exhilarating to just be wide open and to know that, wow, I'm not limited and I can really
and
express myself.
For me, I do feel that really, even with limited time, I do feel that every morning. You know, I don't feel particularly limited with my time. An hour and a half every morning. And the early morning, I'm not sure if either of you are morning people, but when you are one of the only people in the world, honestly, you know, that's awake, or at least like on your block or whatever, it's very liberating. You feel very profoundly alone in a good way, you know? Yeah. There's no expectations. And, you know, I know that I'm privileged to have this time right now. I don't have children. I basically got a job and my wife, and those are things that are important to me. But there's always a time of the day when I know that things are going to clear out. And the question is, what am I going to do with that time? One of the things that I was talking to someone was saying to me not long ago, how do you find the time to write? And I told them that when I was writing my first novel in 2012, the first semi-successful novel in 2012, it was when the TV show, the one on Showtime, Homeland, I think that's the one, was really popular. It was gaining a lot of cultural currency and a lot of people were talking about it. And I would have loved to watch Homeland, but the time that cleared out for me every day, when normally I would have sat on the couch and marathoned 2 or 3 episodes of a TV series, I was spending writing.
And you made a conscious decision to prioritize.
I made a conscious decision that the new TV show that everybody's talking about, that I would really love to be part of this cultural conversation. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. And it turns out that, you know, season 3 came around and everybody hated it. And maybe, you know, I'm not so bad off having missed it after all, but I'm very, very glad that I spent that time to work on something that means something to me.
Dawn, what were you just telling me about Bo Willimon and time management? This is a great example.
The House of Cards guy?
The House of Cards guy.
Yeah, he said I think it was either an Esquire
Vanity
Fair interview where he said that he realized he finally asked for a parking space because he was spending 10 minutes a day looking for a parking spot, and he realized that's 50 minutes a week. Do you know how many pages I could turn out if I had an extra 50 minutes? So he got a parking spot because he was so focused on, and he knew what he could produce, like how many pages he could produce in that, you know, hour span of time. And he wanted to write. Like, he was so focused on what can I shed or what can I make more efficient so I can write more.
Yeah.
I
think at one point I actually made a list of priorities, some things that I wanted to spend my time on. And it kind of went, you know, spending as much time as I can with my wife and my family and my friends, doing a good job at my occupation, my vocation, and writing. The avocation was essentially number 3, and that's very clarifying to be able to say that, because then a lot of the other stuff can fall away. And I think that, again, time is a privilege. It's a privilege to have leisure time. And not everybody gets it, but I think that in the Western world, in the United States, in North America, most people probably have at least a half hour every day that is theirs. And that, I don't want to say it's enough, but it's something. if you spend a half hour every day doing something creative, it can really add up.
And make a difference in your other 23 and a half hours.
Absolutely.
Of your day. Yeah.
You mentioned the value it was for you to actually write down your priorities and to kind of claim them. And then earlier we talked about how you accepted your identity as author or a writer.
Sure.
And some of the other guests we have talked about how difficult it was, but important it was to claim the identity of being an artist or a songwriter or a paint, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think it's so hard for people to own that identity?
I don't know. I mean, it's still something that I struggle with. I've claimed that identity in some ways, but I've probably held back on that in other ways. But I think it's difficult because it involves a sort of self-evaluation that you're not always sure that the rest of the world is ready to give you. So
I think people are embarrassed.
Yes. Yeah.
When you
think you're an artist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And they have kind of they feel like they need to keep up a certain level of humility.
Right.
About who they are and what they do. And there's shame associated with being too big for your britches.
Sure. Is that a Midwestern thing? It feels Midwestern to me.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. There's also, when you claim that identity, then this thing you're doing is no longer just this thing that you're doing, and it's not a big deal. You're actually saying that it is a big deal. And at that point, you are opening yourself up to criticism. What if you call yourself a musician and nobody thinks that your music is any good?
Yeah. It's a vulnerable
place to be.
Yeah.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I think I am in this kind of in-between place in terms of claiming my identity as a writer. Because, I've written 2 novels and I'm working on a third. And fourth, or fourth, depending on how you look at it. Third or fourth.
Okay.
But I haven't, and I have an agent who is helping me to sell, book rights to publishers. But I haven't made a sale yet. I haven't yet made a dime of money off my writing. I've seen a lot of success in other ways, but I haven't gotten that final validation yet. But I'm at a place where without that validation, I almost have to claim this identity in order to keep going.
Yeah.
So, and the validation will come, I guess, or it won't, but that's fine too.
What does the novel look like at this stage if it's not published yet? Is it just on a computer disc? Or is it a giant stack of 8.5 by 11? Or
well, it's so the 2 novels that my agent has and is shopping around to publishing companies, he's basically got it as a file. He will send it to a batch of 5 to 10 editors that he knows out in New York, and then they will take generally a very long time to read it, and then kind of get back with notes. And then make a decision, not just make a decision, but, they have to clear it with marketing and sales and all that, but, and an editorial board, but make a decision about whether or not they want to, offer some sum of money to get the publishing rights to it.
Is it a PDF file?
It is literally a Word file.
Wow. So someone could edit it or tweak it?
Someone could edit it, someone could tweak it, someone could, copy paste it onto their blog, it doesn't happen much, but it's a possibility.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. Now, I don't know anything about getting published in the literary world.
Sure.
But I only know what I read in a magazine or see on TV, and authors trying to get their agent and pitching their novels around. And everything I see sort of on TV or in a magazine it seems like, wow, getting an agent as a novelist is really a difficult thing to do.
It's
really
like
difficult. If you're a rock band and you get signed to a big label.
Yeah. So yes.
How did you do it? What happened?
Well, so so November 2012, I started writing my first novel, and about June of the following year, I had a completed draft, and I started looking for agents, and finding the names of agents is relatively easy. Finding an agent who's willing to sign with you is extremely difficult. So basically, what I did is I had an entire list of agents that I was interested in based on the types of books that they represented, the markets that they were in, and I would essentially query them. So you put together a letter that pitches you and your book idea, and then you include maybe a couple sample chapters. They would have different requirements, and I would send them out maybe five or six at a time. And if they were interested, then they would ask for the whole book, at which point they would usually read the book and say, no, thank you. That's how it usually works.
And when you, at the very beginning of this process, let's say you're getting ready to send out your first 5 emails, the first chunk, do you have any sense of the likelihood of even a response or a success rate? Like, did you feel pretty confident, or did you think, oh, this is a 1 in a million?
I felt cautiously confident. I thought that I had a good pitch and a good manuscript, and I felt, based on some feedback that I'd gotten from people whose opinion I respect on these matters, that I actually had a better than even chance of getting representation, because they just said that, the book is good. I think you're probably going to be in the top 10% of quality of what they generally receive, because they receive everything, from people who are pretty good, really good, to completely untested and almost delusional. Like, I've got an agent friend who occasionally will share query letters from people who are just delusional. So I mean, as long as you're not delusional, you're actually a cut above maybe a quarter of what they get. Yeah. And then if your manuscript is actually pretty good, then that maybe bumps you into the top 25%. But my success rate in getting people to respond to me, not just to respond to me, but to say, this sounds interesting, could you send me half the book? Could you send me the entire book? Was about 25%. In the average batch of 6, I would get 1 or maybe 2.
Wow,
people
that's
coming back and saying yeah.
Rate.
So it felt good, but once again, in those first 3, 4, 5 batches, there were people who were requesting it, and which gave me hope that there might be something here. But then inevitably they would say no. And then finally, I don't remember how many I'd sent out. It was somewhere along the lines of like 50 or 60 total queries. Somewhere in the 50th or 60th query, I got 2 people at the same time who said, this is good, I would like to represent you.
Bidding war.
Yeah.
Wow, that's the showbiz dream, right?
It is. But there was no money involved yet. Yeah. What I'm hoping for is a bidding war between publishers. But that'd be nice. But it felt good, and I've been working with my agent John Rudolph ever since. So,
wow, it makes me think of how many there's a class of people in showbiz or in the arts or in media, however you want to say it, that are the gatekeepers. There's a gatekeeper class, and every medium has them. Like in the music business, it's an A&R person at the label, or in the radio industry, it's the music director of the radio station, or the program director.
Or it's the gallery owner.
Sure.
And it's the literary agent. And those early steps on the ladder are often the most impossible ones to navigate.
They are, and they are based on the way that people talk about getting an agent online. To an unagented writer, an agent is like, it's like a unicorn, you know, like, how do you get an agent? Have you seen one in the wild, you know? But of course, you know, you get one and then there's a whole nother level to it. But it feels good to have someone who is there and ready to read your work, who's in the industry.
Yeah,
So,
totally. You know,
yeah.
a lot of times at least in the music business too, a lot of times people will say, the time when you can get an agent is the time where you no longer need one.
Sure, yeah.
So it's those kind of leaps that happen in the ascension of, you know, the business part of art are often a catch-22.
Well,
and it's like super frustrating and maddening.
Well, and how did it work for you? Did you have to be a musician and get gigs by yourself for a long time before you had any kind of relationships in any kind of gatekeeper community?
Yeah, like, because I've never had an agent or a manager or
Sure.
a label. I mean, I did everything myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm thankful that I've had some nice opportunities to do some things that got me momentum. But those were only due to the power of will,
Right.
and persistence, and a million rejections before any incremental
Success at
acceptance.
all, sure.
Yeah. So it's just like ridiculous levels of failure with incremental progress. But over a period of time, it is progress. It's just a huge amount of time.
Well, and that is the way that the publishing industry is starting to become, because traditional publishing, where you write a manuscript and then you hope that you get an agent and you hope you get a book deal. It's almost akin to, you know, if you were a musician and you practiced and you put together a demo or whatever, and then you went to these gatekeepers and then they turn you down, and then because they turn you down, you never play again.
Yeah.
That would be absurd, right?
Right.
And I think it's similarly absurd to even in writing, even though it's traditionally been this way, to say, oh, the gatekeepers haven't let me in, so I'm going to quit writing.
So you think a lot of authors actually do? They just stop?
I think authors do. I think they just stop. But what's emerging with the self-publishing landscape is that I think in some respects, and it's still emerging a little bit, but I think there are some ways in which self-publishing is somewhat akin to, okay, I don't have a record contract, I don't have an agent, but I'm gonna keep playing in coffee shops. I'm gonna pound the pavement and try to get my own gigs. I'm gonna sell CDs out of my trunk.
Yep.
You know, so that's always a possibility for people.
It's funny. It sounds like the novelist world is following the
It
rock and
is.
roll world a little bit.
It is.
And then, like, aspiring writers out there have what might be considered sort of bad influences, because it's stuff like 50 Shades of Grey.
Sure,
and stuff like,
absolutely.
what is it? Or what was the other the
Twilight
post-apocalyptic indie book that was huge, Divergent or something.
Sure.
And so those things happen, and they're total indie, and they're self-published, and they're zillionaire successful.
Yep.
And then they become big movies, and so now everybody with a laptop wants to make a novel.
And it's flooding the market.
And it's totally funny. And that's exactly what happened with the music business back
Sure.
in the 90s, when everybody could start recording at home and buying digital recording rigs.
So should we
and
be
stuff.
nervous?
Well,
Following the music industry?
Man, if you look at maybe so. I mean, I don't know, but the music industry is
Everybody wants your books for free.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's so weird, like how the value of the intellectual property just gets
Goes
toileted.
down.
Yeah.
Totally.
But it's not like authors can make money touring. Like
Right,
what's
exactly.
the analog there of
Where can you
t-shirts?
Where can
sales?
you monetize? I think that's something that a lot of people in the publishing industry,
Yeah.
the traditional publishing industry, as well as I would guess self-publishers as well, are worried about
Yeah.
devaluing the intellectual property.
Right.
Well, I wanted to ask another thing about your agent. Do you think that your agent was interested only in the raw material that you brought him, the book itself? Or do you think before he made the decision, he had to factor in Andrew, the human being, and to say, do I actually like Andrew? Is Andrew a flake?
Yeah.
Or is Andrew cool? And is he dependable?
Director of operations,
Or
managing $1 million budgets.
Or does that even matter? Is it just the raw material?
You know what? He did ask a lot of questions about me as a person and as a writer, because the reason he explained that he did that is that when he signs agents, or when he signs clients rather, and this is the way that a lot of agents work, he doesn't just want to sign the manuscript, he wants to sign the writer, so that if the manuscript doesn't pan out, he's actually committed to a writer and their career. So
to me, that sounds like a wise move.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
care about the artist.
Absolutely, yeah, and actually, before we ever sent out that first novel together, he took me through about 2 months worth of revisions. He used to be a children's book editor for Simon & Schuster, and he just has a lot of experience in the industry. And I had written a mystery, and he told me that you don't have enough twists in this mystery. I think that you need to have the killer be someone else to add a final twist. I said, okay, let's think about that. But it was probably 4 or 5 revisions that we did. And so he obviously saw something in the raw material, but also saw something in me that he knew that I would be willing to go through this with him. And maybe it was a bit of a trial by fire. Like if he does this, then I know that he's for real. But I learned a tremendous amount through that. I think that I learned more in the editing with him than I did in many ways in the initial writing of the book.
And you had to trust him.
I had to trust him.
Was that easy to do? Or
it was, well, so I mentioned that I had two agents who were potentially interested in representing me. And one of them was interested in taking the book pretty much as is and just flipping it out to publishers. And then the guy that I ultimately went with told me right up front, I want to take you through some edits. And that was actually something that I was looking for. I was looking for that outside perspective that was really going to critique me pretty aggressively in some cases, and take me through a difficult process that I probably wouldn't have been willing to go through myself to make it better.
Yeah. And in the music business, that's the job of the record producer.
Sure.
And the artist has to make the same decision. Like, do I want to just stick to my own vision, or do I want to be really vulnerable and go into a dangerous relationship with this exterior force and trust that they're not going to kill me or ruin my self-esteem or trash my work?
Sure, absolutely.
But at the same time, I sort of want to lay myself at their feet. And boy, when that doesn't work, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But when it works, then the work is like way better than the artist. It brings the artist it blossoms, and that's what you're hoping for.
Yeah, and what he taught me a lot. I mean, he taught me. I think that basically with that first novel, it was pretty good, and I think it was pretty entertaining, and the characters were good and all that, and the people, family, friends, fellow writers who read it all enjoyed it and said that it was great. But I knew on some level that it could be better, and I think what he taught me was how to complicate a plot, really. I didn't totally know how to do that, and it's something that I'm continuing to learn. But I think, there's always the fear of someone else compromising your vision. But for some reason, I'm never worried about that. It might just be, and I'm not sure if that's a lack of confidence thing or just really wanting to be really great. I'd like to think that it was the latter rather than a lack of confidence, but I really want someone to tell me, I really want someone to push me hard on what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, when you find an editor or a producer who you do trust, who has tons of great ideas and who knows you and wants to help you blossom to be the best you can be, that's a great, exciting place to be in your career. And that's happened to me on the most of my albums I produced myself, but the 2 times I hired a producer, both people, Walter Salashimara 10 years ago and Matt Patrick last year, brilliant musicians, fantastic human beings, challenging yet nurturing, and I was able to totally make the best records that I could have possibly made at that stage, only because of them, because they were a great record producer.
Yeah.
And man, if you're lucky enough as an artist to have an editor who can help you excel, it's just the best.
I feel really lucky. Yeah, I really do.
All this talk about editors, I'm interested. Dawn
is an editor.
Dawn is an editor. So
she's pushing writers every day.
Yeah, what is that like to be you're the record producer in this story or whatever, and you're the book editor. So, and you actually are kind of a media producer because you get to do the video stuff. Do you feel like you're bringing your writers, making them the best they could be? Although I know your work is a little bit more academic and not so personal expression. It's more like curriculum editing. But.
Well, I don't edit as much anymore.
Sure.
Right. That when I first started, that was a major part of my daily work. But now I work with the people who work with the editors who have it outsourced. But at any given time, I can go in there. I feel like I'm where I've moved is just being really, really in tune with the audience.
Sure.
Like, who's going to use this? Is it, whether it's a grown-up or a kid, like, is this, like, we had this big discussion today about, can we have a character writing on the walls as sort of a way of mischief? And so we went back and forth between, like, well, writing on the walls, that's kind of like, you're defacing the property. It could be considered vandalism. And like, we weren't sure if the character would have necessarily gone that far, or like, is there another way that the character can make mischief without it being, crayon on the walls? So, and part of that was thinking through, someone watches this and then the kid is like, oh, well, I just saw this kid writing on the wall.
Sounds great.
And so I'm going to write on the, so, and certainly we can handle those angry customer calls when they do come, but just sort of thinking, like, is that really, like, can we express the same concept here but in a different and equally effective way? So a lot of it is thinking about how it's going to be received by the audience. A lot of it is thinking through facets of the audience that maybe other people aren't tuned into. And so we had a huge discussion like a year and a half ago about, can a character it was sort of a throwaway line of like, I can't go back to prison, and like huge discussion about
church publishing.
Yeah, everyone. Church publishing. Yeah, there you go. But a huge discussion about, well, there's going to be some kids watching this who have a parent in prison or a sibling in prison. Like we probably don't want to joke about that. And like, is there a joke that has equal punch to it that doesn't have to put some people in that compromising position of like, I was here in Sunday school on a Sunday and they were making a joke about someone being in prison and my mom is in prison or my cousin or that sort of thing. So part of it is audience, part of it is just sort of thinking through, like, when you've got all these choices to make, like, which direction, like, which road do we want to go to?
Well, and your examples are all about what might upset parents or teachers, but you've got a great eye for what kids are going to love as well.
I try. Yeah.
You try.
Try. Yeah, I try.
I feel like you're always reminding us of what what a child is going to love.
Okay, so
which is important.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
If I can do that, I'm doing
and
my
keeping
job
the parents happy because they're the ones who buy this stuff. So
yes.
I'm thinking of this in a new way for the first time here as we talk about this, because I'm realizing as you guys talk that the editor's job really is the advocate for the audience and the reader. Or in the music business, the producer's job is the advocate for the listener or the radio programmer or whatever. And that's like such a that's the back end of the process that I never think about, because I'm like you are. You're the author. I'm the band.
Yep.
And so I'm thinking of the editor as not adversarial, but it's kind of a dangerous role that can be helpful. But not only does that person help the artist flourish, but that person also considers the end user and the receiver of the art. And wow, that's kind of awesome when you think of it in that way,
great,
because
actually.
it's a beautiful bridge then between the artist and the receiver
audience.
And the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that was fairly transformative for me as a writer, is thinking about the audience and thinking about who my audience is. And so many times when we think about creativity and we think about artists, we think about someone who doesn't care about anyone except their own vision.
Yeah, I just need to express myself. But I don't think that that's true, because there's maybe it's truer for writing than for other art forms, but I don't think it necessarily is. But writing is it's an inherently communicative medium. You can express your vision all you want, but if there's not someone to receive it, if there's not someone who's willing to kind of enter into that, and if you're not willing to let them into the world, whether it's ideas or whether it's a story, if you're not willing to let them into the world that you create, then you've failed. And one of the things that changed for me, in addition to all the stuff that we talked about practice and technology setup, but one of the things that changed for me in November of 2012 is that I changed my attitude toward my audience. I had been kind of spinning my wheels with writing for many years. And part of it I know now was that I was trying to be too literary. I was an English major, so I had this amazing taste in books, high art, and I had these notions about capital L literature and stuff like that. But what could you say that the proper English
literature?
Major?
Thank you. But what really liberated me was realizing that I wanted to write something that was both very meaningful for my audience and very entertaining and enjoyable for my audience. Something that could actually welcome in an audience and entertain them, but that give them something that they could walk away with. So for many years, I was trying to be a literary guy. And as a kid, I more enjoyed mysteries and fantasy and science fiction and stuff like that. And really it was coming back to that and writing a mystery novel for young adults that kind of set me free in some ways to just say, I'm not going to try to be something that I'm not. I'm not going to try to impress people with how clever I am. I'm going to try to write something that I find entertaining and that I hope that other people find entertaining. And so I was really thinking about my audience thinking about the enjoyment of an audience that really liberated me to start thinking of myself as a writer. So when a writer's group comes into it, and I've got a couple writers groups that I share work with as I'm going, or an agent or an editor comes into it speaking for the audience, that's something that is always uncomfortable, but it's something that I welcome because it's what I'm trying to do anyway. And if they're speaking for the audience, then that's something that should be part of the process.
And I think there's a point, I don't know if you agree, but I think there's a point at which the artist can know, like it becomes impossible to see your work as an audience would see it.
Absolutely.
Because you're too close to it, and you need that other person who's also invested in your work and that you trust and that also knows the audience really well. And everybody needs an edider.
Yes.
That's what I had a former colleague who would say that, and she was an outstanding editor. And then isn't there a joke that
Dan Levitin? We got to do a shout out to our friend Dan Levitin, who's an author and also a musician. And his big line that I thought about now a lot for the last 20 years. He said, every musician needs a producer unless you're Prince or Richard Carpenter. And I might argue these days that maybe even Prince needs a producer.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think I should be Prince's producer.
I think you do a good job at that. Yes.
Yeah.
If Prince, if you're out there listening,
because he's 10 minutes from here, from this very
that's right,
this very table. So he could drive over and be here in 15 minutes, and we could talk about his next record.
Well, and you can kind of tell with some artists when they get to a point where no one dares to edit them or no one dares to produce them. Yeah. No one dares to say no anymore.
Well, it gets like a Emperor's New Clothes
a little
phenomenon.
bit. Yes. Yeah.
Have you ever been in a author community or a literature community where the attitude was screw the audience?
No, not that I can think of.
Are you aware that goes on?
I am aware that goes on, or it might just be a prejudice of mine, or a sort of notion, a romantic notion that I had at one point of what an artist was. But really, every serious writer that I've met, and I think every serious artist as well, someone who does it, practices their craft on a very regular basis, and is serious about doing their art as a lifestyle, whether it's hobby or their main vocation, seems to care about their audience, whether it's highbrow or lowbrow or commercial fiction or capital L literature. Everybody cares about how they are received. I think the thing that differs is some people care about certain audiences more than others, right? So someone might care more about the reviewer for the Times than getting a million
people in the seats
than the people in the seats,
yeah.
Or they may actually disdain the people in the seats. They may talk about the unwashed masses. That's something that actually gets talked about in high art communities,
yeah.
And they only care about the opinions of a few key tastemakers in their art community. That's something that I'll encounter from time to time.
Yeah, I'm kind of hypersensitive to that because I spent time in a musical milieu, or whatever that word is, where I was being challenged all the time with a screw the audience philosophy, and was encouraged to adopt that kind of approach, where my natural instinct is to consider the audience and to serve the audience. And I was really pushed from the other direction, and that was really challenging and difficult. But boy, I see that going on a lot, like when I go to the Walker Art Center.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or when I check out independent film, and I think wow, this is really difficult to watch.
It's either intentionally, it can be either intentionally alienating, or the audience that they care about is a fairly rarefied audience.
Yeah, right.
One of the reasons that I appreciate the Walker, and I do go to the Walker very often. We're members of the Walker. I go to the Walker very often and don't really know what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
One of the things I appreciate about the Walker is that they take a fairly, they're very smart curators, and I think that they're really smart about making difficult and often opaque things accessible. So they're kind of doing the work of broaching that gap between artist and audience. But I've been to museums and art film houses where that work is not very well done at all.
Yeah. Well, the Walker Art Center here in Minneapolis is also really good at, if they have difficult work,
contextualizing it.
They contextualize it, and they help the community sort of get their heads around it, and they have a lot of interactive stuff with the artists themselves. And then they also have a lot of work that's just obviously accessible and friendly and beautiful.
Absolutely.
And open to all parts of the community, all ages and all backgrounds. So I mean, we're lucky that we have a place like the Walker, because sometimes you go there and get your butt kicked, and sometimes
you see a cat video festival.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they're a good example of how to do it right, I think. And I know in my own life there are certainly some of my favorite, let's just say music. Some of my favorite music is really challenging, and on first listen was almost impossible to get through. But after investment, I realized that it's my favorite stuff, and it holds up for the long term. Well, so I do think it's good to challenge your audience.
And I imagine that you listen to so much music. I'm guessing that you listen to a lot of music.
Yeah.
I'm not wrong. Okay, so so you can kind of get into those acquired tastes a little bit because you've developed a musical language that not everybody has developed, and you can appreciate very interesting things that people are doing that not everybody can appreciate. I can get that way sometimes with books, every once in a while, something really, really obscure or really seemingly purposefully alienating, I can appreciate in doses, and I'm definitely not that kind of a writer.
I can feel myself coming out of a certain phase of life where years ago I made some recordings that were deliberately difficult, where they were dark subject matter,
sure,
with sort of noisy. The sounds themselves are sort of abrasive, and the subject matter was either not understandable or else it was sort of depressing. And I was doing it because I had the content, and I felt like, oh, these are legitimate songs. And but what happened was I put them out there, and they got no traction, and they got no. I sort of got spanked because no one wanted to hear that from me.
The audience has spoken.
Yeah, right. And it was like crickets out there, And then I realized I had made some recordings that I couldn't even perform because they were too complicated, and they were too intricate, and they were too noisy. And most of the time I have to stand there with my guitar and be a folk singer.
Sure.
And I just couldn't I couldn't take the stuff on the road. And so that really taught me that, wow, even though I could explore those sort of sounds in the studio, that doesn't guarantee anybody wants to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually,
it's fun to explore, but not everything has to be shared.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
And boy, I didn't know that before. Now I think I really learned an important lesson that not everything needs to be publicly launched and hustled. Sometimes you just do it for yourself and just keep it on the down low. But now I think what happened is it made me more of a populist.
Sure.
Because I came out of that really passionate about connecting and making music that was going to be uplifting and hooky and catchy and stuff that was going to grab the ear and meet my audience where they were at. And that's where I'm at right now, and it feels so good to make that kind of art.
I'm curious, as someone who makes music without necessarily having a relationship to a gatekeeper, I assume you have fairly unfettered access to your audience. You're not always going through a producer or anyone who's saying, this is good, this needs to change. How do you make that decision of what is shareable and what needs a little bit more work before it's ready for prime time?
I think in recent years, the bar I set for myself is much, much, much higher now than it used to be, because I learned my lesson. In the old days, where I would put out anything and everything, no matter how weird it was or how noisy, or how useful it was, whenever I had material, I would either put it on a CD or I would just put it up on my website, or I just got everything out there. But then what happened with the technology changing and the internet just exploding, what I learned is that, holy cow, these days, if you put out stuff that's not your best work, which I was doing, I was just putting out anything without checking it. The problem with it is once it's out forever.
Yeah, and there's no taking it back.
There's no taking it back. And I don't think I appreciated that years ago. And back years ago, too, it didn't matter as much because things could fade into the ether 10 years ago, or
Yeah.
and especially 15, 20 years ago. You could put out something, it would fade away, and everyone would forget it. These days, anything you say, any image you put out there, any noise you make, it's forever.
Yeah.
And so I learned my lesson the hard way, and now my bar has been raised, thankfully, and now I know that I'm going to be way less publicly prolific because I'm just going to put out less material than I used to put out, because the stuff that I want to put out now, I want to believe in extremely strongly, and because I want it, because I know it's going to be forever.
Sure.
And so I want to be behind it 110%.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking about that right now, because with the work that I've got with my agent, which he's trying to shop, if one or both of those novels were not to sell and we just moved on to the next one, and he kind of put those manuscripts in the drawer for now, would I ever have the confidence to self-publish them? And I thought about it with with the first novel, the novel that I got my agent with. And I reread it recently because he's shopping the second novel. And I reread it recently and with the intent of determining whether I felt it was ready for prime time. And I immediately knew that I could do better,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was doing better.
Yeah.
And that has been something that has repeated for me with moving on to each new project. Is at the time I think, oh, this is my best work. I'm really clearing away everything, and I've really got to the heart of what I'm trying to do. And then I'll move on to the next thing and forget about the old thing, and have that same feeling with the new thing. You know, this is that thing, the thing I did before. That was just clearing away the cobwebs. That was kind of getting all this junk out of me. Now I can get to the real stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that eventually there might be a novel that I go back to that doesn't make it through all the gatekeepers to get to an audience. There might eventually be one that I go back to that I say, you know what, this one really deserves to be out in the world. And at that point, I might, without the assistance of a gatekeeper, just bring it to the market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and especially if in the future you do have some published novels that got you a certain level of momentum or credibility.
Absolutely.
Then you're in control of your own destiny at that point. So if you've got a community that's interested in you, then you can do a lot of retroactive launching of earlier work.
Yep.
And then because there's people waiting for it, and it doesn't have to be a blockbuster.
And it works both ways in the publishing community currently. You said that in the music world, often when you get an agent is when you don't need one anymore.
Yeah.
It can work that way in publishing as well, where putting something out yourself that you feel confident in is the way that you build a brand and eventually convince the final gatekeeper, the publishing company, that you're for real. So we'll see. For now, I'm just my agent. It always advises me when he takes some of my work, when we've got it polished and it's ready to go out to publishers. He says, "Don't even think about this. Start working on something new." So that's kind of what I'm trying to do for now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I see a difference in that he's telling you, like, keep writing, and I think for people who do self-publish or who are sort of doing it all on their own, you can't be writing songs all the time, because now, like, this is my big booking push now for next fall's tour season, and
right.
then I have to get ready for this, and then I go on tour, and so you might, someone might be writing music only 2 months out of the year, or less, because there's so much that they have to do themselves, to make their living. Versus, I mean, what a luxury in a way, to have someone
to sit at home and promote, to not have to tour.
But just to say that, like, my job is to write, and my agent's job is to do everything else, and I need to be writing that 4.5 days a week, and that sounds really exciting too.
The difficulty with self-publishing is that you have to commit some of your time to doing other things that are not writing. You have to spend a lot of time promoting. You have to spend a lot of time just being a person on social media, building your brand, which is something that I've got a little bit of, I'm a little bit ambivalent about that terminology. Yeah. But yeah, it's not all writing.
Right.
So there's something pure about what's going on right now.
Versus like, okay, I'm going to Bismarck and I've got to find a hotel.
Right.
And check the weather to make sure, it.
Or for me, everywhere I go, I have to bring 10 books with me and go to the local bookstores and beg them to carry them, or whatever. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, eventually you'll have a trunk full of books.
Probably. Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. I mean, one thing that was really a big realization for me was it was some morning where I was writing, and I was a little bit distracted because I was thinking about what might be going on with my agent and whether I might get a book deal someday or whatever. And then I actually thought about whether if it never got any better than it did right now, me just sitting here tapping away on a keyboard in a dark room by myself at 5:45 in the morning, if it never got any better than that, would I be content? And I decided that I would. That there's joy in just the act of doing it, and that's what I'd say to I think everybody always talks about wanting to write a novel. What I'd say to anybody listening, and this maybe goes for other types of artists as well, is if you don't get joy out of it, there's really no point in doing it because the success rate is pretty abysmal and the pay is pretty abysmal. So if you're not enjoying yourself, you'd be better off watching Homeland. Yeah. You could get more enjoyment out of that. But if you enjoy yourself, if you get some joy out of it, then there's really no better way to spend your time than doing something creative.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fulfillment there.
Yeah.
So, and anything else, self-publishing, sharing it with 50 people, sharing it with 1 million people, a book deal, whatever, is a bonus once you've realized that.
Tell us about your adventures apart from novels, because it was so fun to see your links on your webpage. I mean, Huffington Post.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Did you hustle that, or did they come to you? And what did that feel like?
There were a lot of things. There have been a lot of interesting things that have come out of this blog that my friend Chris and I edit. The Stake, which is as I said, it's a pop culture blog where we just write about pop culture texts, movies, TV shows, books, comics as well. There's a lot of comics articles that we enjoy. And also kind of important issues in pop culture, stuff like representation, gender, race, sexual orientation, how pop culture intersects with those real-life issues. And a lot of interesting things have come out of that. One of them was that I wrote an article about Jennifer Weiner, of all people. She wrote a few novels that are often categorized as chick lit, but many people consider that to be a sort of derogatory term.
But everyone knows what you mean when you say it.
But everyone knows what you mean when you say it, so you kind of have to say it. But that was actually what I wrote about a little bit. Is she was kind of waging this kind of public battle to get writing by women, including commercial writing by women that had often been classified as chick lit, to get more serious consideration in book reviews like the New York Times. And I wrote a little bit about that and about how women's writing is often kind of confined to a genre ghetto called women's fiction or chick lit, when really, a lot of it could just be part of writing. General fiction. It's writing. Women's writing is just writing. Mm-hmm. And somehow an editor at the Huffington Post found it and asked me to be on Huffington Post Live, which is their
live video show, which I've watched, actually. Yes. I was going to ask you about this. Did you Google chat on video?
I think I did Google Chat. I couldn't remember if it was Google Chat or Skype, but
we have the app on our smart TV.
Oh, do you?
It's the HuffPo Live app. So you can like click over to it and it opens up on the big television. So we don't even need our computer.
They seem to be going like 24/7.
Yeah.
It seems like they've always got content going on HuffPo
I think it's
Live.
quite cool actually too. And they have the people they interview, it's in-depth interviews. Like they'll have somebody on for 30 minutes with no commercial breaks and no cutaway. And it's quite in-depth. It's like way better than the average like news magazine or Entertainment Tonight or something.
It is, and they get voices that don't often get heard. And I think that they seem to source from just blogging community or people that they find on Twitter who
so they
seem like they might be knowledgeable.
So they
about
called
a topic.
you and invited you to call in and be a part of a panel?
Yeah, I got an email to talk about this very issue. Every year there is a study done by an organization called Vida. It's called the Vida Count, where they do a count of the reviews received in sort of the top book reviews in the United States, and do a count of how many of the reviewers are men versus women, how many of the books that they review are written by men versus women, and the count tends to be fairly bad. It's like 90-10 for some of them. 60-40 is kind of a better percentage that you'll see, but very often it's really bad. And so it was a conversation about that very thing that I had sort of. It was somewhat related to the thing that I'd written about for The Stake. So she asked me to be part of this panel, and I was for about it was 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I didn't talk much, but I talked a little bit, and it was a little bit scary. But
did you have to sit in front of your cam or your inboard camera on your laptop?
Yeah, I had to sit in front of my camera. I had to find a place that had good Wi-Fi because I was terrified of cutting out. And
all the people on that show have their earbuds in.
Yes.
Do you have to have your earbuds in?
Well, you have to have. I think that if you don't have your earbuds in, there can often be like feedback issues.
Feedback. So everybody's got.
And they recommend having earbuds with a
microphone
on the cord.
Yeah.
So I think I used my iPhone earbuds.
Yep.
But that happened, and then the person who asked me on ultimately asked me to submit some articles. Wow. And I submitted 3.
Yeah.
And then kind of dropped out. Actually, maybe I submitted 4.
I read the one about advice for like a writing discipline.
For a writing discipline,
that was
which is
really
what we've been talking about.
Totally.
Yeah,
everybody who's listening to this podcast, you have to go to andrewdeyoung.com and link to that.
Yeah,
because it's awesome.
That's probably the one that got the most traction because
it has a numeral in the title.
Well,
5 ways to da da da.
They so what I learned from working for Huffington Post is that they like numbers in the title. I think I knew that already, but they don't like the number 10.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know why, but my editor there did say we like to avoid the number 10, which is odd because you think always of top 10, but they they like 9 reasons, 7 reasons, 13 best this. I don't know if that is more likely to go viral.
Yeah.
But I did that for a while and then kind of dropped out. It was.
Did you get paid?
No, and that's the thing about Huffington Post, and you talk about the devaluation of creative work, is that Huffington Post does have staff, but then they also have this thing which I think that other sites like BuzzFeed have copied, where they've got essentially a blogging platform where they will seek out bloggers on the web and invite them to be part of this blogging platform. And essentially what the bloggers do is they give the Huffington Post content for free in exchange for the large audience that the Huffington Post has. So the exchange is essentially, we will give you audience, not money.
Yeah.
But
the audience is huge.
The audience is huge. So you have the potential to go viral and get a lot of new hits to your site because you can cross-link to your site, and that's kind of the benefit. But at the same time, you're creating a lot of content that nobody is being paid for, except for I don't know, Ariana Huffington, I guess, in terms of the clicks.
Yeah.
So it was a fun thing that I did for a while.
And it looks good on your resume.
And it looks good on the resume. But ultimately, it was one of those things that didn't give me a huge return on investment in terms of either money or just enjoyment. That sort of listicle writing is not something that I'm very good at. So How about your social media impact? Did you get some more Twitter followers? Have you had any interesting emails from people who read it? I did get some Twitter followers, and there was a bit of chatter on the writing article, and it's always fun to kind of look up what the talk is about it on Twitter, because these Huffington Post things they tend to hang around long after they've been published.
The article we're talking about, that was almost exactly a year ago.
Yep.
So it's been floating around for about a year, and people still check it out.
And people still check it out, and they seem to still share it on Facebook and Twitter. So it's fun. Mm-hmm. It's fun to be read by a fairly large audience. Yeah. Oh, and then the other interesting thing that came out of the stake was, I'm not sure if you know the HBO show True Detective. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah. Heard of it.
So I was watching that and writing about it at the stake, and somehow a sort of essay that I'd written about True Detective got picked up by the New York Times. They didn't publish it, but a writer for the New York Times named Ross Douthat, he's kind of their house conservative, along with David Brooks, and he just writes about pop culture sometimes. Picked it up and wrote and kind of quoted me at length in his own analysis of the series.
Wow!
And we got a lot of hits off of that, and a lot of interesting social media chatter. So
he was sending traffic back to the stake website.
He was sending traffic back our way. Yeah. He was kind of formulating an opinion about the series that quoted pretty heavily from, I think that the words in the post, it was probably half his words and half my words. Like, wow. It was mostly quoting me. Mm-hmm. But those are two interesting things that came out of the stake. So it's just interesting what can happen on the internet when you put yourself out there fairly consistently.
Yeah, try new things. And
some of it doesn't hit at all.
Yeah.
And you work a long time on it, and it doesn't gain any traction. Nobody notices it, and it's depressing. But then something totally random just takes off.
One of my favorite things to research online is artists who get a viral experience, or who are able to take some of their indie projects and have it spin off into kind of a legit mainstream event. Mm-hmm. And a lot of, the quote that I read out there a lot, and I don't know who said it first, but it's make stuff and put it out. Yeah. That's like the rule. Like, even if you think nobody's going to watch this, if it's a YouTube video series, or if it's a song on Bandcamp, or if it's a blog, or like people ask, like, how do you make it in the arts, or how do you make it in showbiz?
You make stuff.
Yeah, make stuff and put it out.
You make new stuff.
Just like crank it out.
Yeah.
And don't even stress about like, oh, no one's watching, or who's going to ever care. Just make stuff and put it out. Just get it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's so inspiring. I just love it.
Yeah, I think it's one of the main things that I've been learning over the last few years is that it's not all going to be great. The creative life, you're not making great stuff all the time. But as long as you're continuing to make stuff, then that's the best thing that you can do for yourself, because some portion of it is going to be good, some portion of it is going to be worth sharing. And you're never going to get to the stuff that's worth sharing unless you're creating a critical mass of stuff. Make new stuff just all the time.
This reminds me even of a blog that I read because it went a little bit viral, and I think it's even a website, and it's about the Beatles, and it's something about like why were the Beatles successful? And of course the accepted answer is, oh, they were brilliant songwriters.
Sure.
And
geniuses.
they were geniuses. But the point of the blog post is, well, actually, it's because of quantity.
Sure.
Because they were
They've
a band.
got a big catalog.
They were a band that was short-lived, like 7 years or something. They weren't a band very long, but they made, I don't know, 10, 12 albums with just tons and tons of. They were making an album every 11 months or something, or every 8 months. And each album had 12 songs. So they were cranking out the stuff, and everybody remembers "Hey Jude" and "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and so many of they had so many great songs. But they also did, noise experiments on the White Album, and they
absolutely.
had weird songs like Maxwell's Silver Hammer that nobody cares about. So they threw a lot of stuff at the wall, but they cranked out tons of work. And boy, if you do, some of it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and one thing that I often like to ask fellow writers, is, between the first draft and the version that is out in the world, what percentage of those words do you think are common between the first draft and the thing that's making it out there? And usually it's like 10%.
Wow.
So much has changed.
Yeah.
So much has changed.
Wow.
Through their own edits, through editors having them rewrite and revise and all that. It's them generating 90% stuff that's just not that good, and then they spend time with it and it gets better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing throughout all that is that they do it.
They do it.
We always
They keep
say that
doing it.
the difference between people who do things and people who don't do things is that the people who do things do
things. Yes.
Yeah. So
That's a good.
That's
another.
It's a tautology,
mantra,
right?
Yeah. It's helpful. So good.
Hey, Andrew, how would you like these listeners to find you?
Well, as we've said, you can find me on andrewdeyoung.com. The blog that we've been talking about is thestake.org. And for the podcast that I mentioned, you can search for The Stake Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.
How often is that podcast produced?
Weekly. There will be there's an occasional week that we will miss because nobody can record, but for the most part it's weekly.
That's pretty dedicated. How long have you been doing it?
Well, we just did our 27th podcast.
Wow.
So not quite a year, and we missed some Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Right.
So so you can subtract that time. But
how long is each show?
It has varied, and we've tweaked the formula as we've gone. There have been episodes that have gone as long as 2 hours. Right now, we're more down to about an hour or an hour and 15 minutes. So that's another thing, podcasting. It's just another thing that you experiment with.
Yeah.
Right? You figure out what works. Elsewhere that you can find me, probably on Twitter, I would say the_younger, which is a play on my last name, DeYoung. That's what it means in Dutch. The_younger. So, yeah, those are all the places to find me.
And how will we know what happens with the novel? If it comes out eventually,
Well, I'll be... Dawn will definitely know.
You'll saturate the channels.
I will saturate all the channels. I will be selling everyone on buying the novel.
And if it gets published and you find out that, yes, that's true, how long till retail?
Oh my goodness.
Years?
If I were to get a book deal today, it would probably be, what is it?
It's 2015.
It's 2015.
March.
March
26th.
I would say it would be like fall 2016, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So
At the earliest.
At the earliest.
More than a year.
Maybe even spring 2017, 2 years. So like a year and a half to 2 years.
We're into the next
You
presidency.
two,
Yeah.
you two are living in the publishing world.
It is. It's not
To
as
you,
fast
that's just
as
normal
people
life.
think it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're kind of ahead of ourselves sometimes.
Yeah,
So-
we are.
So I wanted to ask, because we've been asking guests, if you could go back to kindergartner Andrew, what would you tell him?
I would tell kindergartner Andrew to relax. I was kind of a stressed out, worried kid, fearful in some ways. I had a lot of feelings. Maybe I still do. So I'd probably tell young Andrew to relax. But at the same time, young Andrew being a fearful kid and having a lot of feelings and just like feeling everything that was going on around him, that kind of made me who I am today.
Yeah.
So I want young Andrew to be okay, and I know that young Andrew was okay, but I don't regret any of it. So
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Great.
Excellent. Oh, this was so much fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun too. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent.
I appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for listening. Bye.
Creativity.